Hello, I'm Nate,
And I'm Matt.
and tonight we are talking about Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall from 1990.
Yeah.
One of the many adaptations of the work of Philip K. Dick, perhaps the most famous science fiction writer, would you say? Would he?
Well, at least maybe well, yeah. I mean, it's probably fair to say that.
Yeah, so
Yeah, next to Ray Bradbury and Philip C. Clarke, I would say he's probably the most famous science fiction writer.
Arthur C. Clarke?
Let's just scrap this episode. I told you this movie sucks.
It does not suck, and I'm going to explain why it does not suck. Of course, this would be a part of that long history of Hollywood movies that really don't have much to do with the source material. I've never read the short story that it's based on. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale is the very science fiction-y title of the original story. It takes the general premise of man on Mars and implanted memories, and then completely shifts it around because it has, surprisingly, Arnold Schwarzenegger in the lead role, which, if you know the original story, makes zero sense, but I argue is awesome in this movie.
Well, I think it does work for what this movie eventually became, but we probably should talk about some of the backstory behind this film and how it came to be made. Originally, a screenplay was written based on the short story, kicked around for many years. The writers of Alien had...
Dino De Laurentiis, I believe, was scheduled to produce it, right?
Yeah, and many different actors were attached.
Richard Dreyfuss, actually.
Yeah.
And then I think Jeff Bridges was
William
almost
Hurt.
about to, yeah.
Yeah, so David Cronenberg was even involved at one point, and eventually they settled on a paradigm of trying to make this into an action picture, right? And not so much a, body horror picture, whatever Cronenberg was probably interested in doing with it. And so Shusett and O'Bannon, like I mentioned, who wrote Alien, were involved here. And eventually it came to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he championed the project. Enlisted Paul Verhoeven, the famous Dutch director, after his success with RoboCop.
Yep, brought it over to the Carlco company, which was very famous in the 80s for a lot of action movies. So that was kind of their big thing, and would later, just 1 year after this, be producing Terminator 2 as well. But this film was, the original guy was kind of just a pencil pusher, right? And an accountant.
Dreyfuss would have been amazing, I think, in this movie.
Especially as it's currently shown in its current adaptation, right?
Listen to me, sweetheart. Those assholes at Recall have fucked up your mind. You're having paranoid delusions.
Oh, it's waterproof. It still works. Ronnie?
Yes.
I'm really scared. I want you to help me.
Yeah.
But no, Schwarzenegger can... he is a movie star, not really much of an actor, although I think he actually does give a legitimately very good performance here. I strongly support his work in this as an actor in this particular movie. But they wisely did not try to make him this guy who is working, as a numbers man. No one would have believed it, so they changed the character of Quaid to a construction worker who has a longing for Mars, right? We're in this kind of, I wouldn't quite say it's the dystopian future, but just a future where there's obviously been many, many advances. Mars is a colony, and there's civil unrest and seemingly a looming war with a rebellion there at any moment.
Welcome to Mars, man! What the hell was that? An accident? That's the rebels, man!
Yeah, a future world with space travel is a reality, but we haven't discovered television screens beyond CRTs. So
Well, I think we have to give it a little credit. It was made over 30 years ago,
yeah, fair enough.
so
But
I will say though, it is fun to go back and watch these old sci-fi films and see what do they or don't they get right in predictions. And they do have sort of self-driving cars in this, which are
Yeah.
becoming a thing now with Elon Musk, right? But they also somehow thought that people in the future would want a self-driving car that has an annoying cabbie that talks to you.
You're in a Johnny Cab.
I mean, what am I doing here?
I'm sorry. Would you please rephrase the question?
yeah,
Can't imagine any scenario where that would be a desirable
Played by-
feature of a self-driving car.
yeah, played by the Doctor from Star Trek Voyager.
That's right. Yes.
Robert Picardo. Just from a visual standpoint, it's funny, this film was released in 1990 anyway, but it feels so 80s, just from a visual standpoint. It feels like a mid-80s picture. Well, you like this film. I mean, let's just kind of lay the cards out on the table here.
I like this film a lot. It's one of my I wouldn't say it's like an all-time favorite, but it's a
Yeah.
movie that I've watched repeatedly over the last 30 years, ever since I was a kid up till now, and I've never not liked the fact that I chose to watch it.
Well, is that informed by your love of the Terminator to a degree?
Well, I definitely am a Schwarzenegger fan. I mean,
Yeah.
he was my action hero as a kid.
I'm honored.
I actually really come to appreciate this movie more and more over the years. I think I initially liked it. I mean, obviously, I would have first seen it on TV, heavily edited, which this movie would be heavily edited.
Was there much left of the film?
It was 5 minutes. So
Picture Mars, the end.
Schwarzenegger walks on Mars and then it ends. That's all I saw. But no, I definitely have come to appreciate it from like that initial phase of just kind of like spectacle and action and the propulsive nature of it, which it very is much that, right? It has that very aggressive kind of quality of its plotting.
Yeah, it's nonstop.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a good way, in a way that I think is very engaging and kind of just keeps you. I mean, it's one of those films where I feel like if I were to happen upon it, I would sit down and watch it. You could kind of step into this movie anywhere in the story and keep going till the end. But as I've gotten older and I've seen it more times, I think I've come to really appreciate that I think there's more going on than just the action.
Yeah.
That Paul Verhoeven as a director, RoboCop was his other really famous movie he did before this. And obviously he went into some very schlocky territory immediately after this. There's some schlock in his work always, I think, but he does have a kind of satirical vibe, and there's some satire in this that I didn't pick up on as a kid. The way they play the commercials for the recall, right? And they have the jingle.
Call recall for the memory of a lifetime.
For the memory of a lifetime, recall, recall, recall.
It's just there's fun things like that I didn't appreciate him making fun of sort of the consumerist mentality.
Well, and
at
just
the time.
just people's tolerance of violence. I mean, and not just the violence depicted in the film, but like that news report early on is just showing people getting murdered.
Right.
Just during the course of the news report, and no one seems to really react to
Yeah,
it.
there's some, that is a thing that I think he correctly, as an outsider, he's famously a Dutch filmmaker.
He's definitely making a comment there.
Yeah, he gets something about American mass communication, and I think he does bring that neatly into his films. Starship Troopers would be another one where he gets that as well. But I think this film actually is. I think it's thematically interesting. It obviously plays with the question about what's real and what's not real.
What do you want?
Well, this is going to be very difficult for you to accept, Mr. Quaid.
I'm listening.
I'm afraid you're not really standing here right now.
You know, Doug, you could have fooled me.
I'm quite serious. You're not here, and neither am I.
And it's, I think, one of those films that's purposely ambiguous. People have debated for years. Does Quaid really go to Mars? Or is this all just the package he buys when he goes to recall, right? He says he wants the spy adventure. So is that really what we're watching? Or does it actually become a real story, right? And the film, I think, really doesn't clarify one way or the other. And it's more kind of you as the audience probably fill in which way you would like it to be. But it plays around with that question. And ultimately, I think it even smartly as a screenplay moves out of that question into a much more interesting question, which is the question of identity.
I don't remember you. I don't remember us. I don't even remember me.
What, did you get amnesia? How did you get here?
Hauser left me a note.
Hauser, you're Hauser.
Not anymore. Now I'm Quaid. Douglas Quaid.
Who is Quaid, or is he Hauser, this other figure that was him as the right-hand man of Cohagen, played by Ronnie Cox.
Captain Jellicoe from Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, see, this is why we're talking about this, right, Matt? You agreed
It's all
to
these
this.
Star Trek people in it.
You agreed to this because that it has it has all these Star Trek connections. But no, I think that the screenplay and the direction of it really does raise a question of how do you make sense of your identity, and then that is more like whether it's a dream or not a dream. Becomes almost secondary to that more fundamental question about how do you understand yourself. And a lot of it, I think, is successful because of Schwarzenegger's performance.
Oh man, I don't know where to start with you on this one.
No shit.
I mean, I see what you're getting at in terms of the film's themes, but I really don't get the sense that the filmmakers are interested in those questions really at all here.
No, I think they are. I mean, I think they're interested in entertainment for sure. And
Well, that's the primary focus here for sure.
well, but there's nothing wrong with having good entertainment that then also raises questions. I mean, that's you could have your cake and eat it too. I think on this kind of movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, flat out, I'm not a huge Paul Verhoeven fan. Never really have been. He's a very smart filmmaker, and I can see that. I think he's very talented, especially with action. The satirical elements that you mentioned, I do appreciate that. But there's something about his films that just never quite sit well with me. There's always a real exploitative vibe to his films.
I mean, watching this now, the violence is extreme, and it wasn't
yeah.
quite as. I mean, it was extreme even at its own age, but action movies were much more violent then than they are now. And the Len Wiseman remake, which I haven't seen in a long time, but I remember that was a PG-13 film, and it's a lot of CGI creatures or something that get killed in it. So it's not people getting killed. And this is our hero uses a human being, just a random pedestrian, as a human shield.
Well,
you wouldn't see that in a movie today.
We chuckle at these things, and the film's satirical kind of slant to things make those moments work in a satirical way. We see the guy there's an insert shot of him getting stepped on even after that happens, right? And Verhoeven clearly is trying to say, okay, we're desensitized to violence as a culture, and there's a meta quality in that I'm doing the same thing to you through this movie. I mentioned the news report earlier too, and just the fact that, okay, this is a culture that tolerates violence or is very accustomed to violence and doesn't really faze them anymore. And that's kind of a disturbing thing. But yeah, the violence is just so over the top in this movie, and it gets cartoonish at times, right? But it's still disturbing enough to remain disturbing.
Well, I think when it needs to be disturbing, it hits the disturbing qualities,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's the zingers, the one-liners.
You got a lot of nerve showing your face around here, Hauser.
Look who's talking.
We're married.
Consider that a divorce. See you at the party, Richter.
See you at the party, Richter. So
We should just fill the rest of this review with your imitations. That'd be good. Your impressions.
but it's there's a lot of that, but there are moments where and it needs to be like these are bad guys doing bad things, and it hits home like the stakes of it, and there is that sense of the fact that Ronnie Cox is just an awesome villain, right?
He's a scene-chewing classic here.
You see, Quaid, none of my people could get close to Quato. Fucking mutants could always sniff us out. So Hauser and I sat down and invented you, the perfect mole.
Yeah, I mean, he's perfect in this kind of part.
And he always has those very dramatic turns to the camera too. Like when he comes up on the video screen, he's never facing the screen. He always turns very dramatically and gives his line.
Yes, like he didn't know that he was going to be on the phone or something.
Even though he's the one who called.
Right. But like just the fact that it has him willing to, on Mars, because he's in control of the air supply, willingness to just sort of leave people just to suffocate, die. What do I care?
The oxygen level is bottoming out in Sector G. What do you want me to do about it?
Don't do anything.
But they won't last an hour, sir.
Fuck him.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
he's
a chilling
complete
thing.
scumbag,
It's a chilling thing, and I think the film balances some of those qualities. Yes, there is an exploitative part to its violence and its action, but I think that gives way into, that's like your entry into some of these more interesting questions, and the performances to me are why those questions do work.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger, he's very functional, right? And it requires the right kind of movie for his performance to work. And I do think the tone of this movie does lend itself to his brand of acting. But there are moments where it's pretty unintentionally comedic, especially some of the more, I don't know, some of the relationship moments are very funny for the wrong reasons, I think.
I know it's hard being in a new town. Let's give it a chance, okay?
Laurie, don't you understand? I feel like I was meant for something more than this. I want to do something with my life. I want to be somebody.
You are somebody. You're the man I love.
Bye.
I can't think of a single scene. Give me an example, because I think he works in every scene he's in. I can't think of a scene or a beat where he's not getting the right mark. Because I think what he does in his performance, obviously he's this massive, huge physical figure, right? And it's smart that they make him into a construction worker. It's smart that they make him, because it actually kind of, when he becomes action hero man, I believe that he could beat up half a dozen guys, right? I believe that he could use a gun, right? So you get the sense that yes, he was a trained killer, and then now loses that memory, and then has to kind of reestablish who he is, right? But I guess to me, he plays very well, and there's plenty of scenes where he really gets the sense of the confusion. Like, I'm a confused man. I don't understand who I am.
What the fuck did I do wrong? Tell me!
You blamed Quaid! You blamed about Mars!
Are you crazy? I don't even know anything about Mars!
You should have listened to me, Quaid. I was there to keep you out of trouble.
Harry, you're making a big mistake. You got me mixed up with somebody else.
And I think he does that really well, and he creates that for your audience, that willingness to kind of go along this journey and figure out, I've had something stolen from me, and I need to claim it back, and I don't understand myself. And I think whether it's his scenes with Rachel Tickerton, who is the Melania, the prostitute, that's his love, or if it's even just like his scenes with Sharon Stone, who I also think is wonderful in this film. I always loved her performance as Laurie.
She's very good,
yeah. That's for making me come to Mars. You know how much I hate this fucking planet.
I think he handles it really well. I think he does a lot of good work in this.
Again, for this tone,
not even no qualifications.
Oh, there's qualifications.
He's good, outright good performance. De Niro would have been happy to give this performance.
No. You insulted him a little bit. You got a little out of order yourself.
No, I didn't insult him. I didn't insult him.
A little bit.
It's not even with qualifications. It's a good performance. It's a good performance.
I have to say with qualifications. I mean, again, in this type of film, with this type of tone, I think it works fine. But just back to Paul Verhoeven as a filmmaker, just aesthetically, I think his films are generally quite ugly. They're overlit. The production design. So this was shot, I think, in Mexico City.
Most of it, yeah.
Mostly on a soundstage, but there's some location work too that you can see, especially like the subway station. I think is a real location, and so those are found locations. But just in terms of the production design, it's just quite dated in its look. But I feel like it's just an issue with Verhoeven's films in general. I mean, even Starship Troopers, RoboCop, they all kind of have the same aesthetic to them.
Yeah, very overlit.
Yeah, which just, it cheapens the production. It kind of comes across like a TV show. And I'm not sure if that's intentional. I mean, I guess it's intentional because that's the look that they keep going
Well,
for.
it's not all of his movies because his more like he did a book when he was, or excuse me, he did a movie when he was back in Denmark in the 2000s called Black Book,
Yeah,
which is very more visually interesting, right?
Yeah, well, his later films don't look like that. I mean, I'm kind of talking about this era of these sort of satirical action pictures that he's really most known for. But yeah, when he went back to Europe, you know, he made Elle, I think was another film he made recently, in Black Book, which are quite stylish, you know, just from a visual standpoint.
Well, even I think Basic Instinct followed up on this, and that was much more visually interesting, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder to what extent, because I agree with you, it's not as visually interesting as I might like a film to be.
Yeah.
And
it didn't win an Academy Award for visual effects.
oh, the special effects are great. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I mean, some of them are more obvious now, but
some of the prosthetics
really cool puppet work in a lot of spots.
Yeah, there's some pretty impressive practical effects for sure,
Right,
and the model work is great.
Well, this is that era where I think special effects were a lot more of a selling point to movies than they are now. I mean, people don't really give a crap about special effects anymore.
Yeah.
They just assume that they'll be there, and they assume that they'll be workable and good, and there's not a sense of innovation and how did you do that, right? Whereas this film is of that era where you had just a tiny bit of CGI. I mean, they had obviously the shot where they're walking through and you have the scan, which, by the way, was very funny. A little parody they did with that in The Simpsons.
Attention. All workers trudge immediately to the main yard for the mandatory Worker of the Week award festivities.
Clean, clean, pistol, Uzi, 2 kids posing as an adult. Oh, hey, Homer.
Hey.
I think I've actually seen that one, yeah.
So yeah, you have your Star Trek references. I have my Simpsons references.
There you go.
I really just like the special effects. I think they're incorporated in fairly seamlessly here, particularly the matte paintings, to give you the sense of being on Mars. But to what extent is he maybe coming from a perspective of how overlit things are in America? I mean, just a lot of the settings of this is in commercial spaces, and go to any store, go to any mall, right? You're going to have just light. Was he trying to do that? Again, it's not as visually interesting as I might like it to be, but is that what he's going for?
Maybe. I mean, like I said, it has to be an intentional choice, I guess, but it just, there's something about it that's just aesthetically displeasing, I guess. And that's one thing that's always bothered me about his films in this era.
Well, that's a small complaint.
Well, I don't know if it's a small complaint. I mean, it's the whole picture. You know, it's like I'm watching this for 2 hours, especially a science fiction picture on Mars. Yeah, I mean, that should make for some stunning visuals, and the visual effects, I think, deliver when they need to. But overall, it's like, you know, let's drop the soap opera lighting and get some more dimensionality to what we're seeing here.
Well, I think, I mean, you're right. A couple of the spots where it could be a little more interesting might be where they're going through all the catacombs and stuff like that, where it does seem very much like they're on a set, right? It does definitely look like a set when you're on there. But when they get into the actual mines, right, when they're actually going to this big apparatus that the aliens have created that could give an atmosphere to Mars, right? That's pretty cool. There's really, I think
that does look great. That stuff does look good.
Yeah, and Verhoeven, I would say, I think he does prove himself a very capable director of action here, and very much knows how to use Schwarzenegger as an action hero, right? I mean, the fights, there's a lot of fights in this, and they're all different. You know, I don't ever watch this film and go, boy, it's just another fight. You know, I like the John Wick movies. You know, those are some that have been more interesting recently, or more popular action movies recently. But the fights in them get kind of repetitive. It's just like, oh, you keep shooting, and it doesn't feel that different. Whereas this, you know, each action's a little different. Like that first big confrontation with Douglas Quaid and the men from his work, where he's, you know, basically going to be killed because he's supposedly revealed something about Mars, right? It's confused. It's very tight. It's kind of clumsy and awkward at first, and then it kind of becomes this quick little explosion of violence. And that's different than, say, the later fight where they're going through the different entry point. He meets Benny, the cab driver, and you have this explosions, right? You have a kind of a different sort of flavor to that action scene, right?
Yeah, there's definitely creativity and a real sense of trying to make each gory event unique in some way. Yeah.
So I think that takes a talent as a director, right? And would I have liked him to put more attention to some of the cinematography? Sure, but I'm willing to let that slide a little bit here because I do find the story and I find the performances to make up for it. If I didn't have as good of performances, I might not be as forgiving of it, but I'm pretty forgiving because I do think that you have all around pretty good acting in this movie. And we haven't talked about Michael Ironside, but
I was just going to bring him up.
Let's
talk about him.
He's a very good heavy in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and the film pokes fun at him regularly too, which is kind of interesting. There's that little moment where they're waiting in the bar and he's drinking like Pepto-Bismol or something. Like they give him the most non-masculine drink he could think of in that moment. Just little details like that that kind of poke fun at his character. That's interesting. But yeah, he's just kind of seeps evil, right?
Where are they?
I don't know.
Maybe you know.
Because he's not the heavy in the sense of like the super charismatic villain. That's more Ronnie Cox, right? But I think that he plays very well like the functionary bureaucrat that's just sort of, you don't get the sense he's even necessarily all that great at his job. He keeps screwing things up.
Well, he's left in the dark too.
Right.
I mean, he's a pawn.
First you try and kill Quaid, and then you let him get away. He had help from our side, sir. I know that.
Right. And Captain Jellicoe just tells him what to do, and he tells him many times, "Don't ask why, just do what I tell you to do." Where he clearly has ambitions to be the brains and be a little more involved in the planning, but he's frequently demoralized by his superiors.
Right. So I mean, that's kind of funny to me, like the fact that it has like, wow, your villains have bureaucratic headaches that they're dealing with. I think that's part of the humor that Verhoeven will bring to his work.
I do want to mention Jerry Goldsmith's score as well. Very effective here. Kind of one of his, well, I shouldn't say first, but this is very much the sound of the 90s in terms of Goldsmith's work.
And he does seem to be borrowing a little bit in the opening theme from Basil Polidoris' work on Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, there's some of that, but it's a very quintessential Goldsmith score, and Varese Sarabande put out a nice expanded version of the soundtrack quite a few years ago, but definitely quite memorable and sets the tone of the picture very well right from the opening credits, which is a pretty neat credit sequence.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of fun just to have those old-time credit sequences. I mean, just those little details that don't really exist in movies anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to put the effort into just those tiny things, like what font you use and how do you want to. And of course, you don't know it at the time. You're watching it, but then you start to realize, oh, that becomes the little device that activates later on, that gives the atmosphere to Mars. So it's fun little details like that you kind of appreciate about how movies can be made.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose maybe we should talk a little bit about the kind of the themes or the questions it raises come from the question of like real or not real. In many ways, I look at this film as being sort of almost like Schrodinger's cat, in terms of is it or isn't it real, and it's kind of almost like it's both at the same time, because it never really settles it, and there's a lot of evidence and clues along the way that you could build to support your case either direction. There's certain shots that they hold on. There's certain extra things they kind of do where they have characters looking, and you kind of go, okay, I watch this again. How do I interpret that reaction shot there that I might not have thought of the first time I watched it, but the second time, you start to think, what does that mean, right?
Well, Philip K. Dick's work loves these kinds of questions, right? I mean, Blade Runner being the obvious comparison. Is Deckard a replicant or is he not? And this film kind of follows that vein to a point to make you question everything. And And the story is appropriately twisty and keeps you guessing.
He's just acting out the secret agent portion of his ego trip.
I'm afraid that's not possible.
Why not?
Because we haven't implanted it yet.
And yeah, ultimately does not answer that question, I think, with a lot of clarity. But I mean, you're right to say there are details to kind of notice there. I mean, I think one of the most pivotal scenes is the scene where his wife returns to Mars, and then the recall psychologist is there as well. And
it's a great scene. I love that
It's a great scene, yeah. It actually is very effective and well written and well performed. And yeah, as the audience, that's really the first time, I think, in the film where you really start to question everything you've just seen.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's very well written in that regard, because you have a lot of good setups. You know, early on they set things up. You know, and you hear him say, for example, "I want to have this adventure," and you have the salesman give you basically the whole plot. It's gonna be this. It's gonna be this. It's gonna be this. You start watching all of that, and you just assume, well, I'm watching what really takes place. But in all honesty, I could just be watching the sales pitch play out, right?
You kind of forget about that until that moment, right?
Right.
You're kind of like, oh, wait a second, yeah, that's what the salesman basically said was going to happen from the beginning.
Well, even there's just that one little throwaway line when he goes to recall, and they say,
Ernie,
That's a new one. Blue sky on Mars.
been married long?
and then what's the end? A blue sky on Mars, right? Even the decision to fade to white at the end as opposed to fading to black gives you that sense of maybe it was a dream, right? But again, I don't know that it much matters because the script does move into that third act to being more a question about identity.
I didn't want it to end this way. I wanted Hauser back, but no. You had to be Quaid.
I am Quaid.
That to me is thematically and philosophically interesting.
That's one of the few moments in the film where the lighting is actually quite good and effective. So
Maybe that's the brilliance of Paul Verhoeven as the director, right? He
kept us wanting.
And then he hits it at the exact moment to really highlight the importance of the moment. See,
Yeah.
brilliant cinematography. I take back any questions I had about this.
Well, you know, it's a very effective picture on several levels, I think. I mean, if you're looking for an action film, I mean, it's a very effective action film. Again,
An action film with substance.
Yeah, yeah. And I do appreciate that it is asking those questions and asks them in creative ways.
It's definitely of its era,
Yeah.
right? There's no way around that. I mean, like you said, films aren't this violent anymore. There's certainly some cheesy moments that wouldn't be put into a movie today. The one-liners, the zingers, aren't really even the same thing that you have anymore. But if you compare this to, say, its remake, the 2013, 2014, whatever year it was that the remake came out.
The Colin Farrell, yeah.
But that one is so utterly forgettable. This is not a forgettable movie. I think anybody who watches this movie is going to remember it.